Hello everyone. Some of you may have watched the documentary My Octopus Teacher. If you haven't watched it yet, it's definitely a documentary worth watching. But the man who made the documentary, Craig Foster, he's written a book called Amphibious Soul. And in the book he tells the story of how he and his friend, who's a cameraman, decided they wanted to film the Nile crocodile in its lair. Now apparently crocodiles have got dens or lairs down at the deeps of the river. They're hard to find, they're behind rocks or in caves or behind reeds, there's not a lot of light. But Craig and his friend tracked a Nile crocodile in the bottom of a river until it led them to its lair. And he tells the story of spending time with a Nile crocodile in the darkness of its den. And I remember thinking when I read the story that this man was either unbelievably brave or incredibly stupid. And that sometimes it can be difficult to tell the difference between courage and crazy. When we think about courage, the most obvious examples are courage on the battlefield, running into battle that you aren't expecting to win. Think William Wallace or even Frodo and Sam from Lord of the Rings. But as adults, we know that courage is not always the bold, obvious battlefield kind, but that courage takes many forms and it shows up in surprising ways. And a lot of research has been done on courage, and lots of people have written lots of good things about courage, all the way from Greek philosopher Aristotle to more recently Brené Brown. But what all of the great thinkers and writers have said about courage is that vulnerability is our greatest measure of courage. And that link between vulnerability and courage is really worth thinking about. If you look at the root of the word courage in Latin, the root is the same as the word for heart, that place where our emotions come from. And in the ancient Roman world, you couldn't be brave without exposing your heart, without some emotional risk on a deeper level, some exposure on a deeper level. Courage requires that we open our heart, which shouldn't surprise us as followers of Jesus, because Jesus is the picture of perfect courage. He sums it up. But the pictures of Jesus that are most powerful are not the AI-generated ones of Jesus riding in on a cloud of glory with trumpets and angels. The pictures of Jesus that have stayed with us over the generations are Jesus the baby lying in a manger, Jesus washing his disciples' feet, Jesus crying outside the tomb of his friend, Jesus in anguish in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus nailed to a cross, Jesus talking with a woman named Mary in the early light of a Sunday morning. In Jesus, we see that courage shows up to whatever situation or person needed his presence. If we read from John chapter 1, John describes the incarnation. He describes God stepping into human history, the Word made flesh. We see the ultimate act of courageous presence, a God who shows up. Eugene Peterson, in his translation of the Bible, The Message, translates that John chapter 1 as the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. And in the way Jesus lived and in the way Jesus died, we hear our invitation to do the same, to live the kind of courage that shows up, which means that courage will look different in different situations. Sometimes courage is following a crocodile into its lair. Sometimes it's listening without judgment to the person who needs you to hear their story. Sometimes courage is the grind of daily life when you are running on empty. Sometimes courage is a self-care boundary. Where is God inviting you into courage today? What will courage look like for you? Where are you being invited to be the presence of Jesus, to simply show up to the person or the situation in front of you? Know that courage will look different for each one of us. But know also that God, who stepped into human history, who stepped into our story, who showed up first, will walk whatever it is we are facing through with us, that we do not have to be brave alone. So may you go into the week full of courage, knowing that God goes with you. Amen.